All right. So I had some people ask about going back through and like showing some gameplay where I'm not punning away match after match. Which if you've seen this last two YouTube videos, you have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. But I figured I would go through some of like the previous trophy leagues, go back over them, give some commentary so you can see like some of the lines of play, see some of the decisions that were made, and get a little better understanding of how the deck works, and maybe use this as a resource to help you with some future decisions. I'll talk through like some of what I'm thinking, uh, some of the decision making that goes into playing Jun Shadow in Modern at the moment. So I'm taking this list. This is the last list I trophied with. Went back, found the matches from this league. So I'll kind of go and show what all happened in those matches, give you an idea of some of the play patterns. Uh, any notable inclusions in this list? So a couple things that were pretty significant in this. No copies of Croxa. The reason for that is I'm running a basic forest, and Croxa and basic forest not really the best of friends. But I am running a pretty stock creature package for Shadow, for Ragavan, for Tarmogoyf, for Street Wraith. A lot of people are interested in seeing Dragon's Rage Channeler right now, but I'm not sure that it really fits what the deck is looking to do in those early turns of the game. Uh, and at the moment, we're like really trying to establish what the core of the deck should be, which is why you've got a lot of these four ofs, four Shadow, four Ragavan, four Tarmogoyf, four Planeswalkers. The removal spells can even be divided into fours, like three Lightning Bolts and a Dismember, four, three Unholy Heat, and a Kolaghan's Command, four. Uh, so you kind of get that steady foundation of four elves before you start working on the little peaks here and there, the one ofs, two ofs, those flex slots. So what I want to do is uh, talk about a few of the choices here, just so you can get an idea of why they're included in the list. Some examples are like four or three copies of Ren and Six. I think this deck has a pretty greedy mana requirement. It really wants to hit like the third, fourth, and fifth land. It does not want to naturally draw the third, fourth, and fifth land. So Ren gives a little bit of like a compromise there. You have a lot more games where you might find that second or third land, and then Ren gets you to that fourth, fifth, sixth land drop without making it so you've got those dead draws. You're still getting to hit like live spells, plus the Ren ultimate gives you a legitimate win condition, and some of those go long matches. The one copy of Grist, great to be able to search up with Traverse the Ulvenwald. Great against like the control matchups where you don't want to just straight up get a creature that gets one for one. Great in the mid range mirrors. Great when you've got something you want to get rid of, like a Murktide or uh, a Primeval Titan. And you've got like a dead Ragavan on board, just sack that away. It can be a win condition, but I don't think that's actually come up for me yet. Other than that, the Kroxa directly got transitioned to Kolaghan's Command, so not much change there. Still messing around with like the Lightning Bolt team or Lightning Bolt Unholy Heat Dismember split. Haven't found a real comfortable sweet spot for that yet. In the sideboard, two copies of Engineered Explosives for everything from Urza's Saga to the Go Wide decks, Hammertime, anything like that, Rhinos. Two Alpine Moon, mostly for Urza Saga, also really great against like Tron. Four Soul Guide Lantern, Grave decks are a nightmare for this, so you need to be prepared for them in some way. One copy of Ancient Grudge, again, like a little extra Hammer Time, Hate. Three copies of Terminate for any of the big creatures, the Primeval Titans, Murktides, Opposing Shadows, whatever. Two Turok Dread Cantor for the blue-white matchup, for the four-color Yorion matchup, and one copy of Liliana, again, for control matchups, mid-range matchups, Yorion, any of those. So that's pretty much the basis of the deck. So we can just like go ahead and start jumping into a few of these matches that I want to go over. So let's get match number 1 up. So on the play, match 1, winning the die roll is so huge in Modern right now. The number of games that are won or lost because like the person on the play had a Ragavan on turn 1 and the person on the draw didn't have an answer is insane. Hand disruptions, messing up combo decks on turn 1, just anything to that effect. Even the answers on turn 1 are getting ridiculous, like being able to March of Otherworldly Light on turn 1, Prismatic Ending on turn 1, Unholy Heat. Any of those are fantastic turn 1 plays. So I recognize my opponent's name. I used to play a lot of Grixis Control, so I figure I'm up against some sort of control strategy. But a big part of my testing process is I do not believe in hedging against something. Like I'm always going to go into every match assuming I'm completely in the blind and go from there. I think it gives the best chance of like transitioning online results to real world paper results. So check out an opening hand of a couple lands, fetching a shock, Street Wraith, and a bobble, so I can Street Wraith or bobble and Street Wraith Scry on turn 1. I've got a removal spell, a couple threats, so like hand's fantastic. The only things that would make it better is if I had like a Ragavan on turn 1, or if I don't have a Ragavan, like a hand disruption spell. And maybe this bobble ends up finding me one of those, so we'll see. Opponent keeps their 7. Let's get this evened out so it's not messing up the frame. So that should be good. All right, so start off with bobble myself, because if I see something that I want to keep, I can Street Wraith and immediately draw into it. See a bobble, it gives me the chance to just like repeat the same decision. So I can bobble myself again, but at this point, there's nothing that I can draw into on their turn that I need access to. I've got my removal spell on 1, so I don't want to aggressively crack the second bobble. Like, I don't want to get into a situation where I bobble myself again and I see another fetch land, and I don't want another fetch land. So now I've got to fetch with this Verdant Catacombs. What if I want to hold up Unholy Heat? Now I need to fetch and shock. I'm going down to 15. What if they start off turn 1 land, suspend Rift Bolt? Then I just gave them a free 5 damage for absolutely nothing. So instead, I'm going to wait for their end step to bobble myself so that I can decide if I want this land to come in tapped, if I want it untapped, if I want a second Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, what. So we draw Ragavan, which is a little awkward on turn 2, but whatever. See a Celestial Colonnade, so I know I'm up against a control matchup, which my hand is not particularly great against. I don't have any hand disruption. My clock is fairly slow. So I bobble myself, see the swamp on top. Don't want that. So let's fetch and shock. Our life total is not very likely to matter. So we can be a little aggressive. Here, I could dash Ragavan. But the problem is, if I dash Ragavan, I don't really have a good follow-up to that. Like, I'm just doing 2 damage to get a treasure and not promote anything. Like, I'm not going to hit anything off their library that I care about. So instead, I'm just going to go ahead and, like, commit the most mana play to the board, which is playing Tarmogoyf. So we'll just get that down. That way, if they want a Prismatic Ending this turn to get rid of Tarmogoyf, I can always, like, dash Ragavan next turn, then play Shadow and have a treasure left over. And I'm not going down on using my mana efficiently as I would this turn, which is just like dash Ragavan, deal 2 damage, and do nothing. So they fetch and shock a Watery Grave. So Esper, not something you see all that often. So now we've got Dash Ragavan and opponent Solitudes, which is pretty okay with this. Like, I would feel worlds better about this play if I had a hand disruption spell to follow it up with, but I don't. So we're just gonna play out the shadow and go. Like, I'm kind of assuming that if my opponent ditches a March of Otherworldly Light to their Solitude, it probably means they have another removal spell in hand. Because the likelihood of them just like giving up all their removal to my second threat's pretty low. So now we got Teferi on board, which I've got covered multiple ways. I've got now removal spells like crazy. And I'm winning the race against Colonnade, so I don't feel like I need to bolt the Teferi and hold up Unholy Heat. But like we assumed, our opponent does have another removal spell for the Shadow. So now my hand is absolutely awful. So what I'm going to do is take my next draw step, and essentially, if it's not a threat, I'm going to scoop. We got 2 more games to play, hopefully, so there's not really a reason to continue this game when I'm in this bad a shape. Like, I'm going to lose to the Celestial Colonnade unless I throw double Lightning Bolt at it, and then I'm just throwing my entire hand away to deal with, like, a land. So I think I'm just not in a position to come back from this. We've got sideboard games. I've got good sideboard cards. Let's take advantage of that. So going to game 2, we win the die roll. Let's talk about sideboarding a little bit here. So in these control mirrors, usually what I'm boarding in and boarding out is boarding out things that are like 95% dead, like your Dismembers, boarding out Temur Battle Rage pretty aggressively because March of Otherworldly Light, Solitude, just means that the possibility of getting 2 for 1 is too high. Boarding in things like Turok Dread Cantor, Liliana the Veil. If I'm expecting like Snapcaster Mages, I might board in 1 or 2 Soul Guide Lanterns if I have more to board out, which in this case would be like Lightning Bolt. But a lot of the blue-white lists right now are running Rest in Peace, so I don't want to bring in Soul Guide Lantern if I think my opponent's bringing in Rest in Peace. But like Turok is a card that is almost unkillable if it resolves. It's like Supreme Verdict or Bust. So you get the ETB trigger, ditch 2, third card Supreme Verdict. So having Turok be like a 3 for 1 that you can K command back or get like another one is nuts. Liliana is a fantastic card for keeping pressure on your opponent's hands. So they can't just stockpile a bunch of answers. Maybe they won't have that extra card to ditch to Solitude, anything like that. So let's check out our first hand. We've got Ragavan on 1. We've got a Shadow follow-up on Holy Heat. Traverse is pretty dead for a while. The hand isn't great. It's kind of a matter of, do I think turn 1 Ragavan is going to be able to put enough pressure on my opponent to give me time to find something better? Or do I think I need to throw it back? And I decide to keep under the idea that this might turn into a situation where I get Ragavan on turn 1. Maybe I'm able to hit my opponent once with a Ragavan, get my treasure, and now all of a sudden, like, a bauble or a hand disruption spell means I can Unholy Heat my Ragavan and traverse for a Turok, something like that. Like, I can see a progression with this hand that wins me the game. Is it a great progression? Absolutely not. Is there plenty of hands that I could see that might be better? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, like, it's a horrible matchup. So sometimes you have to take those kind of like iffy lines and see if it gets you there. And I'll talk about that a lot over the course of this league. It's just like a lot of times you're gonna have to take the high risk line and see if it works out. And like I draw the Turok on turn 2, which is fantastic because now if this Ragavan connects here, then I'm looking at a turn 3 Turok, and that can go a long, long way to getting this match kind of shored up. Not shored up. Give me good percentage points in the match. Makes more sense. But obviously things like counterspell are going to be an issue. But here my opponent goes straight for a Chalice of the Void. So all I'm thinking is Turok is resolving. 100%. Like if they Solitude my Ragavan, that's fine. I still get to Turok. I could Memory Deluge here, but all I'd be doing is like putting Deluge into their graveyard for free and not getting Turok down, like giving them a chance to untap. So they discarded Kaya's Guile, which is really good to know about because that's another answer they could have to Turok outside of Supreme Verdict. But I'm locked out of this Chalice, or locked out with this Chalice, and just need to find something to do to get the ball rolling. One thing I should be doing here that I didn't is I should be casting some number of spells into this Chalice to set up Traverse. Like I could easily cast a Shadow and Inquisition into the Chalice just so that at any point I could, if I find a K command, I could get rid of the Chalice, cast Traverse, go and get like a Kroxa or another Turok, something like that. So that's I don't know if I would call it a punt as much as looking back, I could have done a better job about putting myself in a position if I did find the right things instead of just like accepting that I'm not going to get value on these cards. They might as well stay in hand. All right, so big turn for opponent coming up. 5 mana means Teferi. We saw they didn't have the Supreme Verdict on 4, so now it's Teferi digging to Supreme Verdict. And then we've got an interesting line on the way back. So we top deck a Liliana here. Two options here. Option number 1, cast Liliana pre-combat. Hope our opponent doesn't have a counter spell. Option number 2, swing in with the Turok. Hope they don't have like a Snapcaster to block it because we kind of need to push through damage while this Teferi's on the board. Option number 3, we could play Liliana. If it resolves, take up, attack at the Teferi, or we could attack at them. Ultimately, I decide to go to combat first. The reason for this is I decide that killing the Teferi is irrelevant. I could sit here and spend like a turn killing the Teferi, next turn swing at them, but I would rather like get the game over with in 2 turns. So attacking at the Teferi is like great for getting the 5 mana Planeswalker off the board, terrible for actually getting the game over with. So I decided to go straight to combat and attack at my opponent. So if they have like a Snapcaster to block in, it means this Liliana is going to resolve. They do not block. So now I've got free reign to cast my Liliana. They could have a counter spell here, but ultimately if my Liliana gets countered, nothing's really changing on my side. So from here, it's just hope my opponent doesn't have another Snapcaster or Kaya's Guile or Supreme Verdict, which is a lot of potential draws, but they do not find one. Scoop that game, so we are on to game 3. Alright, so game 3, I kind of mentioned some of the sideboard choices, like out with the Battle Rage Dismember, in with the Turoks and the Lilianas. You can see that there. We are on the draw for game 3, really looking for hand disruption, which this hand has. The Unholy Heat is a little awkward. Like if I had more cards that were coming out in the matchup, I would be boarding out on, or if I had more cards to come in, I'd be boarding out Unholy Heat. But without more cards to bring in, and I really don't want to be on the trying to Soul Guide Lantern my opponent's Snapcasters out of the game plan. So decided to just leave the Unholy Heats in. But this hand has got like the turn 1 hand disruption, turn 2 threat. It's got redraws, can lower my life. Pretty much everything we're looking for. Uh, so opponent moles to 6, which is very nice. We draw turn 1 Ragavan. I consider the Ragavan for a minute, but ultimately decide that if the Thoughtseize, if I cast Ragavan here and my opponent untaps and plays Chalice of the Void, I'm pretty much dead in the water. Like I can cast the Tarmogoyf, but I can't do anything about protecting it. Thoughtseize is dead, and that's one of my best cards in the matchup. So after tanking for a second, I decide to Thoughtseize instead. If I can take a Chalice, if I can take a Rest in Peace, like any of those things would really help me keep the pressure on. So I see the Chalice, so automatically I know, hey, rewarded, that's what I'm going to take. But to note the rest of the hand, they've got like Drown in the Lock with the basic planes, so they might not be able to play that in the next 2 or 3 turns, or the next turn or 2, sorry. They've got Kaya's Guile with no third land, and they've got a Solitude. So my hope is that my opponent doesn't draw a third land, or doesn't draw a land that they can cast Drown next turn, and I can maybe like force them to Solitude something and get rid of this Kaya's Guile. Because at this point, like anything I can do to force them into a 1-for-1 game is positive for me. So they get their Watery Grave. Go ahead and pop their hand out here. And they play basic planes. So I know that my opponent's only play right now is likely Solitude. They could have drawn something else, but there's not a lot of things they could draw that I care about outside of like March of Otherworldly Light. They could draw Spell Pierce. Like, it's not a really long list of spells that are interacting right here. So because I draw the other Thoughtseize, I decided to go ahead and do that because I can double up with the Ragavan and like feel fine about this turn. Turns out they did draw March of Otherworldly Light. So we go ahead and take that. Can play out the Ragavan. And like I said earlier, we're just trying to make it so that our opponent might have to Solitude this Ragavan, which they missed third land drop. That makes me feel worlds better about that as well. So let's go ahead and go to combat. They Solitude, ditching the Kaya's Guile. So that's 2 more relevant spells out of my opponent's hand. And since I gain a little bit, I'm able to start like firing off these Street Wraiths and not feel so worried about my life total. And we got a Beat Stick Tarmogoyf down. So there's an important line here. My opponent picks up the Glacial Fortress so they can cast Drown in the Lock. So I know they've got Drown in the Lock and another spell in hand because they didn't play a land last turn. And I have to think about where I want to go with this. Thinking back on this this one particular line, I chose a play that I don't think gave me the most percentage points, and I probably could have made a better play. So my opponent goes to main phase, Drown in the Lock my Tarmogoyf. What I should have done was Unholy Heat target my Goyf, get the instant in the yard, let the Tarmogoyf get killed, untap, traverse for a Croxa, or no, I don't have Croxa, traverse for Turok, and be able to Turok my opponent's remaining cards out of hand in the next like turn or two. But ultimately, I decided not to Unholy Heat. I kept thinking like, well, this Unholy Heat is. All right, audio cut out a little bit there. I kept thinking that this Croaks or this Unholy Heat is more live than I'm giving it credit, so I need to hold on to it for a little bit longer. And realistically, I should have just like given up on the Unholy Heat and said, yeah, this card's not getting any better. I just need to swap it out for a relevant creature. I did get rewarded by immediately drawing an actual threat, so now I give myself the same option again of maybe I want to Unholy Heat my Shadow and turn on Traverse that way. But we just have to see if my opponent finds an answer to my Shadow. Which that is not an answer. So it looks like we're going to get to swing. Possibly. Alright, so I still have access to this line of Unholy Heat, but picking up K Command is huge here. Like, these are definitely two draws that could have gone much, much worse. But I got bailed out a little bit here. Alright, so now I've got a few options. I don't want to fire off this K Command into like a potential counter spell. My opponent didn't have double blue up when I drew the Death Shadow and played it. So there's a chance that their dead card in hand is a counter spell. So I don't really want to like just give them the free target that turn. So instead I'm going to wait. And I am going to fire it off end of turn here. So I thought about this line a good bit as well. I've got the K Command. What I can do is K Command, make my opponent discard, get back Street Wraith, and then go to my turn, Street Wraith to 4, traverse for a fetch land, and fetch and shock to exactly 1 and swing with the Shadow. But the problem I had with that line is if my opponent's last remaining card is like a removal spell for Shadow, then I just went down to 1 and gave up my entire hand. Like, I gave up K Command, Traverse. I've got the blind draw off Wraith that I hope is good enough. So instead, I decide to get back Tarmogoyf. And it says my opponent's paying costs. So at the end of the day, like if they decide to kill the Shadow, that's fine. But instead they have a Memory Deluge, which would make sense if that was the card they had in hand for a minute, since they just got 4 mana. So we make them discard, get back Tarmogoyf, they discard a March. So we know we've got a live attack in here. And now I've got like a second threat to play out. So if my opponent decides to untap and Supreme Verdict, I'm insulated because now I've got like the double threat. They don't kill me with single removal. If they Verdict, I can traverse for another threat. But ultimately I decided to just like go ahead and traverse for a Turok because I look up and realize my opponent's got exactly 2 cards in hand. And they scoop as soon as I start putting Turok on the stack. So Turok does the heavy lifting. That match single-handedly won game 2 and put the fear of Kefnet into our opponent game 3 and was able to steal us the match. So that's one of the really nice things about having Traverse the Ulvenwald in the deck, is it essentially gives you that like Turok copy 3 and 4 that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's really nice in matches like that where you just want to see that more often. Alright, so match number 2. Lose the die roll this time, so boo. This hand is very iffy. When I think about evaluating these hands, I think about what's the worst case scenario and how bad or do I lose to the worst case scenario. And for me, the worst case scenario here was my opponent has a turn 1 Ragavan and then an answer to my Ragavan. Because then I'm going turn 1 Ragavan or turn 1 Thoughtseize. They're hitting me with Ragavan or killing my Ragavan and hitting me with their Ragavan. And now they've got access to the draw a card mode off Ragavan, the extra mana, and there's a chance that Wrenn and 6 coming down and pinging their Ragavan might not be enough. Same thing with Dragon's Rage Channeler. Like, if they play Channeler, I play Ragavan, they kill it, they have another spell, maybe there's a chance they can get Delirium online, and Wrenn just doesn't do anything. So I end up throwing that one back, and I'm rewarded with a fantastic 6. So the difference between this hand and the last hand is the clock. Like last hand I've got a Ragavan and a Wrenn and 6. This hand I've got a turn 2 Death Shadow or Tarmogoyf, and turn 3 the other one. Plus a Bauble Scry if I want it, or just more information off the Bauble. So keep this, ditch the 3rd fetch land, see what my opponent's up to. Turn 1 Snow-Covered Plains Giver. So, alright, taxes. The Giver's a little annoying against taxes, but just means I gotta find a removal spell. I decided to bauble them. I'm gonna play this Thoughtseize turn 1, so bobbling them gives me a little more information on what I might want to take. Fetching and Shocking because I need to get a clock going, and Thoughtseize to find out that they are in fact not taxes, or weirdest taxes hand I've ever seen. So looking at this hand, Sigarda's Aid is the biggest red flag right off the bat. I can't get the card off the field. As soon as it comes down, it makes all these hammers and every other equipment just like a huge issue for me. And they've already got Sigarda's Aid, land, Ink Moth, Hammer. So in 2 turns, if they find a 3rd land, I'm just dead to the Ink Moth, and I've got no removal spell at all. So I end up deciding to take the Sigarda's Aid. Like, I'll take my chances with dealing with the Pure Steel Paladin, which I know they're going to be able to play. I saw the Flooded Strand off of the Bauble. So now we've got a Pure Steel is protected by a Giver of Runes. And I'm just hoping to find find a removal spell. I thought about bobbling myself here and going for the play of finding a removal spell to be able to like tag the Giver of Runes on their turn, and maybe I untap and find another removal spell. Ultimately, I decided that my best bet was to get Goyf down and get pressure. So maybe they weren't able to find, because like right now they've only got Ink Moth and Colossus Hammer as artifacts. So maybe they're not able to find a way to turn on Metalcraft quick enough. And I can go like hit with Tarmogoyf next turn, hit with, or play Shadow and Goyf, make a big lethal attack the turn after. But then they have Esper Sentinel on top, and that kind of fixes like all of their problems. Because now they've got play the Esper Sentinel, Spire up the Ink Moth, equip the Hammer, give it protection, and I am dead. So yeah, Esper Sentinel is probably like one of the best draws there. So if I happen to have some way of dealing with the pure steel, like I'm still just dead to the outvaluing. So game 2, talk about sideboarding against Hammer real quick. So I need to go get the deck list back up. Because keeping deck lists up and ready to go is apparently difficult. Alright, so against Hammertime, some of the easy board outs are like Ragavan, because it just gets stonewalled by literally everything. You don't want your opponent to have like a Burnt Forge Tender, Sanctifier on Vec, a Memnite, an Esper Sentinel, and just like stand in the way of your Ragavan. Boarding out Street Wraiths, because this is a matchup where my life total very much matters. I don't want to get one shot by some random creature with a hammer. And I know I've got to slow down to play the control role, so I'm going to be a little more conservative with my life total anyway. And then finally, I'll board out some number of like Thoughtseize or Kroxa if I have it, or Temur Battle Rage, because if I'm not going aggressive, Battle Rage is less exciting. And the hand disruption after like the first 2, maybe 3 turns of the game just becomes a complete obsolete card. So like I don't want to keep drawing them after turn 2 or 3. So we'll see how close to this I stuck. Usually board ends are like EEs, an All-Star, Alpine Moon to deal with Urza's Saga, Ancient Grudge, Terminates. I've started boarding in like Turok a good bit against them because a lot of their threats like Esper Sentinel, Stone Forge, Pure Steel Paladin, Burnt Forge Tender, all those are white, so being able to just put like an indestructible blocker in front of them is really nice. Also dodges like March of Otherworldly Light, Prismatic Ending, a lot of those cards. So we'll see how close I am in my commentary boarding. So yeah, like Wraiths, Ragavans, a Battle Rage. Boarded out a Grist too. It's a little slow and clunky against the deck that's almost mono 1-drops. And boarded out a single Thoughtseize. So that's 11 cards coming in this matchup, which is pretty high. Alright, opening hand, a couple pieces of removal, Inquisition. My thought here is like, I'm not getting outvalued by an Esper Sentinel. I've got a quick combo kill covered. I've got Sanctifier or something like that covered with Inquisition. I just need to find a threat. And I've boarded out the Ragavan, still got Turok, Shadow, and Tarmogoyf. This is like very much on the weaker end of keepable. Like not having a threat is huge. You need pressure in these matchups or you're going to get rolled over. But because I've already decided like I'm taking the control route, I decided to keep it. Kind of that hope of like, I got 4 lands in hand. Hopefully I won't draw more of them. So start off with an Inquisition. Opponent's got a pretty stocked hand. A couple of Forge Tenders, Spellskite, Teferi, March. So with the double Forge Tender, like Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat's pretty dead regardless. Like I don't think I can do much against that. So I'm just going to take the Spellskite here. Like I can't deal with my spells being protected and redirected, or damage off my spells being prevented, spells getting redirected, sorcery speed. Like I gotta pick some kink in the armor here, and ultimately I think I can just like shoot down the Teferi with burn spells if I need to. Like it's a good hand from our opponent. So I've got to pick some way that I think I can fight through, and basically none of my spells being able to do enough damage to Spellskite is the path I have chosen. So drawing Tarmogoyf was absolutely fantastic here, because now I get to get a threat down. especially one that can attack into Forge Tenders. They could March of Otherworldly Light here. My thought is I can't do anything with Heat or Bolt, so I might as well play out the Tarmogoyf. If they want to exile a card to get the Tarmogoyf off the board, sure. But if I sit here and like play nothing, they're going to have that March of Otherworldly Light from now until the end of time. So I might as well just play into it now, get it over with, and like bite the proverbial bullet. So drawing Thoughtseize is huge. Gives me another chance to get something off the board. So they picked up the third land. I'm looking at the Forge Tenders. Like, I already know they're there. I'm probably racing them okay if Teferi's not on the board. I just can't lose my Tarmogoyf. So I decide to take the March of Otherworldly Light. Like, if they had decided to March, ditch a card here to get rid of the Tarmogoyf, and I could have ditched or Thoughtseized away the other one, I would have been perfectly happy with that as well. But ultimately, they decided to not go that route, which means I do get to start attacking. Playing my land tapped here because I don't have a Death Shadow. I don't need to lower my life. I can't Heat or Bolt Forge Tender, and I can't Heat or Bolt Teferi on their turn, so no reason to shock it in. There's Teferi, bounce the Goyf, yep. So that attack by our opponent there was, I don't want to say strange. Like, I get the chip damage, but ultimately it's an attack that I just like don't think matters. But drawing Shadow is really nice. Now I get to kill the Teferi, play out double threats. I know one of my opponents draws with the Plains, so their hand is like another stone or another Forge Tender. Sigarda's Aid is annoying. Like, if they find a hammer to strap up these Forge Tenders, I'm in a lot of trouble. So I really need to focus on like trying to get the game over with, get these things on chump block mode before anything happens. So this is a turn where I learned some interesting text that I did not know. For anybody who is unaware of the card Burrington Forge Tender, a fantastic 1-mana 1/1 from Lorwyn, protection from red. You can sack it to prevent all damage a red source of your choice would deal this turn. For the past like 13 years, I have always thought that card said like sacrifice target permanent gains protection from red until end of turn. I don't know why I thought that, but I was convinced that that was the text on Burrington Forge Tender. So when I drew Terminate, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, well, I can't do anything with that. Like, if I try to terminate the Paladin, they just sack the Forge Tender and stop it. Until I read it over 7 more times and got a little hint from a friend in the Grimflayer Discord that is not, in fact, what that card says. It says that it prevents damage from red sources, so I can, in fact, terminate a Pure Steel Paladin. And so now I've got this decision of, do I want to terminate the Pure Steel and attack? Do I want to try to Lightning Bolt myself, which they can sack the Forge Tender to prevent me from Lightning Bolting myself. So that's, to a point, important. What I ultimately decide with is I'm just going to attack now. I'm not going to terminate yet, because if my opponent does decide to block with the Pure Steel Paladin, then that's another card off the board that I don't have to deal with. If they try to like block with Pure Steel, and I go to bolt myself and they sack a Forge Tender, like, I can terminate the Pure Steel and leave them with just a Forge Tender and 1 draw step and they've got to find a way to kill me, like, right there. But either way, like, this is going to come down to my opponent's got a draw step to kill me. My thought with the holding up terminate is if they do find like a hammer or something, I can respond to the hammer with terminating the pure steel so they don't get to draw. I'm still dead, but I can do something. Alright, so opponent straps up their Shadow Spear, and I say, cool, here's a terminate. Now the hope is I find something that lowers my life total so that I can force both of these attacks to be chump blocks, get these off the board, and then just bolt my opponent. But I draw the EE and decide, like, hey, I can just kill my opponent with that. Like, yeah, I'll sacrifice my Shadow to get rid of Double Forge Tender, Shadow Spear, Cigar to Aid, and just attack for lethal with the Tarmogoyf. So, that is game 2. Now let's find game 3. Alright, so back on the draw. This hand is a lot sketchier than the keep I had game 2. Game 2 I kept like hand disruption, double removal spell. This one, double hand disruption, no removal spell. I'm 3/4 of the way to delirium, and I could scry with this bauble, but ultimately I think like that hand's not getting there because I have no ability to kill anything. This hand protects from a lot of the big things like Thoughtseize taking Sanctifier or taking Pure Steel Paladin, Stoneforge, something like that on turn 1 is great. The downside is if my opponent has the card Esper Sentinel, then they're about to draw their deck off of me. So I'm sitting here praying no Esper Sentinel, and they play Springleaf Drum. Worlds better for me. Unfortunately, Street Wraith does not find a land. So a lot of people will talk about like deck thinning not being a significant influence. I would say if you have the choice, also I got to talk about Street Wraith at some point. If you have the choice, if you need a land, I would 100% recommend not fetching before you cycle your Street Wraith. If you don't need a land, I would 100% recommend fetching first. Because even if it's not statistically significant, it is a non-zero amount. And anytime you can gain a non-zero amount, I would almost always recommend it. About the Street Wraith, I boarded out Liliana of the Veil on the draw because they're more likely to just have the board flooded. And I boarded out the Wrens, or 2 of the 3 Wrens, because Burdenton Forge Tender is just like a card I can't deal with Wren. So if I'm losing a bunch of good targets to ping with Wren, the card itself gets a lot worse. I bring back in a couple Street Wraiths because I'm able to be a little more proactive with them, and I need to find specific cards on the draw. Like I need to find Engineered Explosives, I need to find Shadows and Unholy Heats, things like that. So it lets me be a little more consistent with my draws. And the last card I brought in was what? Oh, brought Thoughtseize back in on the draw because my opponent's got a ton of fantastic 2-drops. Then I saw like Teferi and March on the play, so having a few more answers for those proactively is very nice. So Thoughtseize my opponent, see like a really awkward hand of just like 4 lands and Sanctifier. So immediately feel rewarded about my Thoughtseize, bring back in, get the Sanctifier out, and now it's like if I find second land, I'm cruising. If I find second land, I'm cruising. So, foreshadowing here. My opponent plays Burnt and Forge Tender, and I'm sitting here thinking, why are they playing Forge Tender? Because they're just going to beat me with Urza's Saga. Like, why would you not, or why would you take yourself off making a construct this turn? Then I remember that Springleaf Drum is over there, and so they can still make their construct even though they played their 1-drop. I draw Dismember, great for getting Shadow online. So now if I can deal with like a construct, I can at least get a Shadow on the battlefield, and that might help me slow down things a little bit. So opponent decides to make another construct. I'm sitting here mathing out like, okay, if they make a construct, their token's a 3/3. They can animate Ink Moth and make it a 4/4. So if they play like a Mim Knight or something else, or they search up and make it a 4/4, then this makes it a 5/5. And if I don't dismember this now, like I'm just opening myself up to possibilities I don't want to deal with. Like maybe they just play another Ink Moth and I don't have a priority opportunity, or they can respond to me casting Dismember by growing this out of Dismember range. So I decided to just like go ahead and fire this off. A float mana, and then Blind Pithing Needle naming EE, which obviously me sitting here with an EE in hand feels pretty bad. Not that EE was going to do a whole lot if I didn't see lands, but I do draw the second land finally. Trying to decide if I want to fetch or fetch and shock, but ultimately I decided to just like go ahead and fetch and shock, get 2 big shadows down. Like I'm not afraid of the 1/1s, I'm afraid of the constructs, and so I need to like be big enough to keep those from crushing in. Now here is an important turn for opponent, and you'll see why. They've blanked another one of my draws. Alright, so I've got a decision to make. I can play out another Tarmogoyf and just say, or play out a Tarmogoyf and just say like, here's what I got. Hope it's enough. I don't really have attacks. I could swing into the construct, but they could make another construct and block. I could terminate something, but then they're drawing a card off Esper Sentinel. And if the game like keeps going, I'm not winning that. So ultimately I decide like I've got to do something to help ease this board state. So I'm going to cast either Unholy Heat or Terminate. I decided to go with Unholy Heat because I can pay for the Esper Sentinel. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well just like get down the EE so I don't have this just hanging over my head every turn. So let's play the EE, pay for the Esper Sentinel, get that off the board. And I'm sure a lot of you are saying in the comments, Michael, please don't Unholy Heat the token. And to that I would say, I'm totally sure that I know how big this token can get. So I've got Delirium. This Unholy Heat's dealing 6 damage. He's got a Construct token and 2 Inkmoth Nexuses. That's a 6/6 Construct. But Michael, he's got enough mana to make a Construct. To that I say you're right, and I didn't account for that. So when I was doing this this math in my head, it was, okay, he taps the 2 Inkmoths, animates themselves. This becomes a 6/6. Now he's got Hallowed Fountain and Urza Saga. He can't make a construct. You remember that foreshadowing from earlier? I forgot that Springleaf Drum was a magic card on the battlefield. So my opponent, after thinking about it for maybe 48 seconds, decides, oh yeah, I can make a construct and fire up Ink Moths. And this construct that they've already got is going to live. And I say, yeah. So In hindsight, like, I could have unholy heated the Esper Sentinel. I don't think it would have changed. It wouldn't have changed anything that turn. It might. I don't think it even changes how the game played out. You'll see in a second. But it could have been a possible play. Alright, so take number 2. You're our opponent. You've drawn for turn. You're making a dude off this, or no, you're not making a dude. You're just getting Shadow Spear. You're playing something off this Urza Saga. More specifically, a Nettle Cyst, I believe. Alright. You're our opponent. What's your play? At the moment, you've got the 2/7/7 constructs, both of which are potential lethal. You can fire up a couple ink moths and make them both 9/9s, which is unfortunately bigger than my 8/8 shadow. So you can force through the blocks that way. You could Shadow Spear up a construct token and like animate an ink moth, attack with both, trade with a shadow, lifelink, kill another one, anything like that. So what opponent decides to do is really interesting. On last turn, we went to Unholy Eat the token. We saw 4th down, 60 yards to go, and we decided to bring out our big leg kicker, and we punted it. Like, we just dropped back 53 yards into the wind, just booming punt. So what opponent does is they take the ball. On 1st down, they drop back and punt it even farther. They like 75-yarder down at the 2-yard line, spiraling kick. So for anybody that doesn't know, I'll explain how Death Shadow math works. All combat damage outside of like first strike is assigned at the same time. State-based actions that check whether a creature has died or not by combat damage are not checked until after that damage is resolved. So, when my opponent attacks with their 2 very large construct tokens and multiple other creatures, the damage from those tokens is going to resolve at the same time as the damage with those other creatures. Death Shadow is going to receive some amount of damage, and then state-based actions are going to get checked. And they're going to say, okay, this Death Shadow is at what power? Well, what's your life total? Oh, it's this. All right, how much damage has been dealt to the Death Shadow this turn? Oh, this. All right, is that second amount more than the first? Kill it. Is it less than the first? Shadow lives. So, opponent's plan here, I'm assuming, is to force me to block both of these constructs, which I have to, because I'm dead if I don't, and then animate these 2 Ink Moth Nexuses to get Nexuses, to get these construct tokens bigger than my Death Shadows, so that my Death Shadows will die inside of damage. Unfortunately, the way that combat damage works is the Esper Sentinel and the Burnt Forge Tender both deal a point of damage to me at the same time. My Death Shadows grow from 8/8s to 10/10s the next time state-based actions are checked, and see that I'm at 3 life instead of 5. And now my 10/10 Shadows have got 9 damage marked on them from these lovely construct tokens, instead of the lethal damage that they would take if they had just attacked with the constructs. So now I've got 2 Shadows staring down a card in hand and a Nettle Cyst. I've got a Terminate in hand. I believe my opponent has given us an opportunity to win. We're not going to Thoughtseize because we need to get our opponent dead this turn, or we're dead. Like, they can just Shadow Spear up one of their 1-drops next turn, and we can't do anything about that. So we're going to cast the card Terminate, targeting a Germ token. We do have to let our opponent draw off of this. So if opponent's last 2 cards are March of Otherworldly Light and a white card. They can tap this germ token in the Springleaf Drum for white, discard a white card for March, or exile a white card, get rid of one of our shadows, and live and untap and kill us. I see opponent is paying costs. I almost like flip the table. Nothing I can do about that until they tap the germ token for Spell Pierce. So we were able to steal that game in horrific fashion. We choose, in fact, to not pay the 2 mana for Spell Pierce, get across our 2 Death Shadows to put our opponent to -3. So somehow squeak out that one. Match 3. I believe this is one I keep saying I have a decent matchup against, except for the last 2 leagues where horrific punts occur, but we'll see how it plays out. I lose another die roll. Opening hand's pretty bad. I've got double Ragavan. I can't cast either of them. Bobble, which is good into Tarmogoyf, not so great into just like a shock land. Not getting Shadow online. Decided to throw it back. Much better 6. Got a couple fetch lands. I've got Thoughtseize, Shadow, so I can turn to a Shadow if need be. I've got Ragavans. I've got a Premier 1-drop. Ren to make sure I'm continuing to hit my land drops and grow my Shadow. Opponent starts off Steam Vents and Darcy. So now we've got decisions to make. Best case scenario is I can kill this Channeler with Ren and 6. The likelihood isn't particularly great because they could untap with Counterspell or Spell Pierce. They could have enough cards to get Delirium online. A lot of ways that plan could go wrong. But out of what I've got available, Seed Bolt on top off of them because I know I'm going to fetch and shock and play something on turn 1. Decide to go for Thoughtseize because even if I can't deal with the Dragon's Rage Channeler right now, if I can deal with like a Murktide Regent, then I give myself a lot of time. Like, I should be able to race the Channeler with Shadow, but I can't really race a Murktide Regent if they're able to get it out like turn 3. So I see this hand of Archmage's Charm, Force Negation, Consider. Best card in the hand against me is Archmage's Charm. Consider gives them a lot of ways to possibly find Delirium, but the worst thing that can happen to me is my opponent like Archmage's Charm and steals a Shadow, and I don't have a way to get it off the board, and I just die to that quickly. So I'm going to end up taking the Charm, leaving them, let's pop out the hand, leaving them with the 2 Misties. They consider the Force Negation and the Lightning Bolt that they draw for turn. So opponent decides to main phase a Consider. I'm assuming looking for like a second 1-drop to play out, maybe a way to get Delirium online, which they'd been a Mishra's Bauble. I don't know if I agree with that line. I think they could have like kept the Bauble, drawn what, or played it that turn, shipped another card off the top with Channeler, and potentially found Delirium that way. But they decided to just ship the Bauble and ship the Bauble with the Channeler trigger, ship the Tarn with the Consider. So now they've got a completely random new card off the top. So they're cracking in. I know they've got a Lightning Bolt in hand. I've got 2 options here. I can, or really I've got like 5 options, but realistically 2 options. Option number 1 is cast Ren and 6, try to ping the Dragon's Rage Channeler, which if they have another blue card with Force Negation, then they get to counter the Ren, get the Channeler trigger. I'm behind. If they decide to like bolt me and flip over Delirium, then I'm behind. So the Ren and 6 line's looking really negative for me. The second option is cast Inquisition, try to get like Lightning Bolt out of hand or something else, and then cast Shadow or Ragavan. That line ends up sounding a lot safer to me, which they do end up having the second blue spell for Wrenn and 6, so rewarded. I'm looking at the hand, and my first thought is, do I think I can bait my opponent? I could fetch and shock an Overgrown Tomb, play Shadow. They fetch and shock and go to bolt the Shadow, and I cycle Street Wraith, grow the Shadow out of bolt range, and they have to go back to their turn with the Channeler. The other option is I take Lightning Bolt, get down Shadow, and they just can't cast anything. They've got a Channeler that's a 1/1. I can outrace that. And they're just like not getting Surveil triggers. And ultimately I opt for that line. I think that my opponent getting free scries is more valuable than me like trying to bait this Lightning Bolt play. Because now if they draw a Lightning Bolt or Unholy Heat, and if they don't find Delirium off Unholy Heat, then I can still just like cycle the Street Wraith and save the Shadow. So I protect myself from like a second removal spell off the top. I'm racing the Channeler really well. Like, I don't think there's a lot of pressure on me to make unnecessarily risky plays just for like the gotcha moment. So I decide to cycle some Wraiths. My opponent right now like doesn't have Delirium online. If they had a removal spell, I would assume they would have tried to kill the Shadow on their turn when I was tapped out. They didn't. So my assumption is their card that they've drawn is either another land or another counter spell. Archmage's Charm would be really bad for me, but another land would be great. Like, I race this really badly if their last card's another land. So I'm just going to assume it's not a burn spell and start trying to clock my opponent. Do get a nice attack here. Unfortunately, I guess fortunately, their last card was not a burn spell, but unfortunately they do top deck a live spell. So now this Channeler flipping over Delirium is a realistic thing. Like, if they flip over Delirium, draw Lightning Bolt or draw Unholy Heat, I can be in a lot of trouble here, because then I'm not outracing this Channeler and I don't have a way to lower my life total. I'm a little surprised that they did this on their first main phase, because if they flip over something they don't want, like say, I don't know, Expressive Iteration, whatever, and turn on this Dragon's Rage Channeler, now you're running into the issue of, if I just find a bolt or a way to lower my life total, like, I might just kill you on my turn and you can't block. So they end up flipping over Blood Moon, which I was surprised to see main deck Blood Moon, but either way, it's a pretty solid card, which does turn on the Channeler. They also flip over a Ragavan, so like, I see Ragavan Blood Moon get flipped over. Now I don't have a clue like what my opponent would have been looking for that was better than just casting a Ragavan when they have Counterspell. So I go to my turn, draw a fetch land, and just like go for the combat, get the concession, which I was not expecting there at all. I really don't know why my opponent ditched both Blood Moon and Ragavan. Like, I could have outraced the Blood Moon, yes. The Ragavan, I think, would have been a great choice. It was a blocker, still lets them hold up counter spell. Worst case scenario, like, I have to spend something to try to get it out of the way. And if they just have like another card for or I guess they can't have another card for force negation, but they could play the Ragavan and like hold up force on my turn, hold up counterspell. Like that one was a little iffy to me. All right, so let's pull up game 2 and sideboarding for the Murktide matchup. All right, so Murktide's one of the matchups that I kind of want to like key in on with this list, which is why we've got things like 4 copies of Soul Guide Lantern, 3 Terminate, a Liliana the Veil, all great at dealing with exactly the card Murktide Regent. So that card will absolutely ruin any chance you have if they get it down early. Not a lot of ways to deal with like anything bigger than a 6/6. So if you're able to Soul Guide and like keep them off Channeler, Unholy Heat, Murktide, that'll buy you a whole lot of time to get a little momentum going. Ragavan's pretty bad in the matchup. They've just got more 1-drops than you. They've got more 1-mana interaction than you. So it's a pretty easy cut. Sometimes I'll cut Inquisition because it doesn't deal with actual Murktide. It's kind of like cutting Inquisition against the old Prowess decks that were running Stormwing Entity, because Thoughtseize deals with Stormwing, Inquisition does not. Things like Traverse or Kroxa are a little awkward here because a lot of times the Murktide opponents are bringing in like Relic of Progenitus, so having your graveyard online forever is a little dicey. And then like Temur Battle Rage I might cut, K-Command I might cut. You don't want to run Battle Rage into like Brazen Borrowers, and K-Command isn't really killing much very efficiently. So we'll see how close I was. Ended up boarding out the Wrens, which is fine. Like, they're a whole lot better on the play than the draw. So I do approve of that cut by myself. Ragavan, I kept 1 in. A lot of times I'll keep 1 in because if you see 1 late, like, it's great, but you never want to see it on turn 1. Cut a couple Street Wraiths because we kind of have to be the control deck in the matchup. And then like a Temur Battle Rage, same reason I said. I don't want to get 2 for 1 by like a Brazen Borrower. Brought in 4 Relic of Progenitus, 3 Terminate, Liliana. What were the other ones? Do I really just like keep closing this deck list? Oh man. Cut a bunch of ways to not deal with Murktide. Brought in a bunch of ways to deal with Murktide. That's 90% of the sideboard decision there. Alright, so let's see. Opponents on the play for game 2. 5-land double Soul Guide. I don't believe this is going to get here. I don't think I have to say too much. Just we need hands that like actually do something active. And that's not really it. 6 is a lot better. We've got Shadow, Thoughtseize deals with Murktide. Got a couple Baubles and Street Wraiths, so we can kind of scry our first couple draws, get a little more information. Ultimately decide to bottom the Stomping Ground. I'm on the draw, and I've got 3 redraws, plus my draw for turn, plus my draw next turn to find a second land. So I feel like my odds are pretty good. And as soon as the opponent plays no 1-drop, like, I feel fantastic. They could have Spell Pierce for my Thoughtseize, but more than likely it's like a consider turn, which means the chances of this Thoughtseize resolving are like through the roof. So I start with bobbling myself. I see another Shadow on top. I don't want another Shadow when these aren't even online yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss that away. Fetch Shock. Get another Bobble down to see their card. Get a little more information. And then I don't like cycling Street Wraith here. Because if I Thoughtseize and I just see like Bolt, 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 Murktide, Murktide, or something insane like that. Like, I'm just setting myself up to get wrecked by that. If I hold this Street Wraith, then I can set up like a gotcha turn with a Bolt or Unholy Heat. I can get another Bobble plus a fetch land off my draws and be able to scry with that. Like, casting the Street Wraith right now isn't really solving anything. So I see Channeler on top of my opponent's library. End up deciding to take the counter spell. I could have taken the Murktide, but they're like a ways off of getting this Murktide live. And if I take the counter spell, like, I can just guarantee if I find a land, get down double shadow next turn, and that's gonna race my opponent's hand extraordinarily well. Which, there is the land, so I know their only play right here is Channeler. So they're going to have to more than likely tap out for Expressive Iteration next turn. I do have to pay attention to the turn after that, casting Murktide. But if I get double shadow down here, like, I'm just putting so much pressure on my opponent that realistically a Murktide, not this upcoming turn, but the turn after, is probably going to be too slow. Alright, so the expectation here is iteration. Best case scenario for me would be iteration, scry over Delirium, iteration, scry over Delirium, not hit third land. So this Channeler has to attack. Because that could open up lines like find another Thoughtseize and be able to just kill them. Because they'd be attacking me down to 9, Street Wraith to 7, Fetch Shock to 4, Thoughtseize to 2, attack for 22. This attack, I kind of get. At the time, I was like, oh my god, this is such a bad attack. But thinking back on it, it makes a lot more sense. My opponent is not blocking with their Dragon's Rage Channeler. There's a decent chance that I'm going to find something to grow my shadows next turn. So if you're not blocking with it, and if you're not blocking with it and it's going to have to attack eventually, offering up this trade isn't the worst thing in the world. Like, obviously, I'm not taking it, but I kind of get it. There's tiny little bits of an argument there. So I go to my turn, find a Soul Guide, which is amazing. And this is where some of the life total management comes into play. So I'm Soul Guiding the Scalding Tarn. My opponent missed their last land drop. So I think another land in the graveyard is probably one of the more difficult asks for them to get Delirium. I can always Soul Guide if I need to take them off Delirium altogether later. But at the moment, I think that's one of the harder ones for them to get. So, Fetch Shock, attack with my 2 shadows. There is the line that I could cycle Street Wraith, try to find Lightning Bolt myself, and present lethal. Absolutely a possible line. But my opponent has got two unknown cards in hand, and I don't want to give them a free out of just having like bolt, and untap and kill me because I went for this Street Wraith line. Instead, I can Fetch Shock, go down to 8, leave myself safe from double bolt. I still have plenty more than lethal next turn. I've got to redraw off this Wraith later. Kill the Channeler because I don't want my opponent getting like free scries. And as soon as they cast Iteration here, I figure the game's probably over because I don't think there's anything they can hit that deals with both of the shadows or even one of the shadows. Because being at 5, I can always cycle the Street Wraith to get out of Delirium range or get out of Unholy Heat range. I can sack the Soul Guide to get out of Unholy Heat range, any of those. So we end up taking that one down. Next match. I think I know what this one is, but we'll double check. So again, opponent wins a die roll. Unlucky, but happens. So pretty good opening 7, especially if my opponent's on some sort of a creature deck. Like being able to Unholy Heat a turn 1 guy means Tarmogoyf's coming down as a 2 or as a 3/4 Unholy Heat creature fetch land, and that gets it out of range of a lot of removal spells in the format. So if my opponent plays like a Ragavan or something on 1 that I can Unholy Heat, then being able to open up on Goyf on 2, get swinging second Goyf on 3, maybe find another 1-drop. Just gives me a lot of room to work there. So, opponent cycle Street Wraith. My immediate thought is, alright, like mirror match, and then plays Misty. So as soon as I see Misty, I'm assuming like Living End. Draw the Inquisition, which is like obviously one of the best draws we could have right there if it is Living End. Here it's important to think about your turn progression. Like I could wait on the Inquisition for next turn, but then I'm not getting a Tarmogoyf down next turn. I can't wait until turn 3 for Inquisition, because then that gives them turn 3 to untap and play a land, and if they have a Living End or a Cascade spell, I can't do anything about it. So have to Inquisition on turn 1. Sure enough, Living End. So they've only got one other cycler, so we'll take the Outburst. Try to get some sort of pressure going next turn. They cycle the Architects, which means I do have some pretty thick Tarmogoyfs. The downside is I'm just like one Living End away from being in a really rough spot, especially when they cycle a Waker of Waves, Hidden Endurance. So now it's like, all right, third land, cast Living End, like I'm dead in the water. Shock in the Steam Vents, so like Violent Outburst is coming. So attack. They don't cast it yet, so I'm assuming they're just gonna like wait for the end of turn and wrath my board and untap and kill me. So alright, can't do anything else. Here you go. Well, that's not a Violent Outburst. Interesting. That is also not a Violent Outburst. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, it doesn't make sense for them to pass the turn if they've got a Shardless Agent, because you don't want me to potentially draw Hand Disruption and get rid of that. And then they just scoop. So, assuming they didn't draw the the Cascade spell. But either way, I will absolutely take that. Living End pre-board is like a 10% matchup. Gets a lot better post-board. As you saw with our sideboard choices, we've got like the 4 copies. Nope, wrong list. As you can clearly see with the sideboard copies, we've got 4 copies of Soul Guide Lantern. Helps a ton in this matchup. You could bring in something like Terminate if you just want the ability to kill one of their like flyers, or the Waker of the Waves, something like that. Wouldn't fault anybody for that. I really don't. I kind of trust the Unholy Heats and Bolts I have in the deck to do that job. But something you can consider. So for the 4 Soul Guide Lanterns, I'm boarding out like a Wrenn, a Lightning Bolt, and an Unholy Heat and Dismember. Just like trimming some of these removal spells. Kind of saying like, if you get your guys back, I'm dead. So I'm just going to play with the assumption that you're not going to get your guys back. This is one of those classic shadow hands of like, I've got a bunch of really good spells, and if my opponent doesn't have a perfect hand, then I've got a chance. But at the same time, I don't have a Soul Guide Lantern. That's like the only thing that's really keeping me in this match. I am on the draw with redraws off baubles, so there's an argument. But opponent starts off with a ley line. So the tipping factor for me for this hand was I've got Premier 1-drop that they're probably not interacting with. I've got Hand Disruption. I've got Mishra's Bauble. So I'm going to see at least 3 new cards. Draw for turn on my first turn, draw for turn on my second turn, draw off Bauble. So I've got an okay number of looks. Like maybe Ragavan hits a grief off their library. Never know. It's not the worst set of possibilities out there. But obviously the ley line makes things a lot more difficult. Drawing the Bauble just means I get 1 extra draw to see for Lantern. Have to Bauble myself. I can't Bauble my opponent here. Alright, so the hope is that one of the next 2 cards under this Verdant Catacombs is a Soul Guide Lantern. And... Alright, so now I don't have a Soul Guide. Got to shift gears a little bit. Wrenn and 6 doesn't really do anything for me here. Can't play that Stripe Riverwinder. So I decide to play Grist and start ticking up, because maybe Grist just like flips a couple extra creatures in the yard, and all of a sudden this next living end like isn't quite as bad. And he flips a Soul Guide Lantern. Thank you, Grist. You're an all-star when I need you. So opponent Shardless is... It's annoying. It's not the worst until Grist flips another Soul Guide Lantern. And now we're like pissed off at the world. So I need to do something proactive here. Wren's not doing anything. I've got Thoughtseize, which I can't target them. What I can do is Thoughtseize my own Wrenn to get card types in the yard and be able to traverse for a shadow. So what are we going to do? We are going to Thoughtseize ourselves, take our own Wrenn, and traverse for a shadow. Because that sounds like good, clean magic. So now at the very least, like, I've got a shadow. I've got a shadow with a Battle Rage in hand. We're going to take that proverbial maybe our opponent messes up line. Like, I think that's happened at least once this league. I don't get this line. And maybe this is why I get a trophy every now and then, is my opponents just like make plays that make no sense to me. Maybe it was a misclick. I don't know. But he bounces the insect token. And my assumption is that my opponent thought it didn't matter. Kind of like the Hammertime opponent attacking with the 2 constructs and the Forge Tender and the Esper Sentinel. Like, maybe he thought he'd bounce the token, whatever, he'd attack, I'd have to block a big guy, and Shadow would die because, hey, he's blocking something that's bigger than he is. That's my guess. His opponent just didn't know how it worked. But ultimately, they end up attacking with everything, and I say, cool, there's a 7/7 Waker of Waves. I'm taking 7 off the other guys. Let's throw a block here. Take 7. 7 damage gets marked on the shadow. State-based actions are checked. I'm now at 3 life. Shadow's a 10/10 with the -1/-0 from the Waker. And he's got 7 damage marked on him. So now my last thing is I hope my opponent doesn't have a Force of Negation. I can't beat a Force of Negation. I'm going to main phase the Battle Rage in case they do have it. Like, maybe they don't attack. I don't know. I'm giving myself outs here. But they do not have the Force of Negation, and they end up losing because of that one. So that is 2 opponents this league that have attacked into Death Shadow. I'm assuming not understanding how the combat math would play out. Alright, so on to the last match of this league. I absolutely don't remember. Oh, I do remember what this one's against. Maybe because I get like a cheat sheet over here because all of the actions that were taken in the game show up. But this was a fun match, so buckle up. Also, this is probably my favorite matchup in all of Modern. I'm not going to give it away just yet, but there's a ton of back and forth. This is a matchup that people ask about all the time. It's a matchup that I think I've got a really, really positive win rate against. And a lot of it comes down to like making intuitional reads. So if you're interested in picking up Death Shadow, or if you play it already, this is a matchup I would recommend playing because it gives you another sense of the importance of your life total at all points of the game. And that sounds like a lot of things to say about a matchup. Hopefully some of this will show that that's the case. So we win the die roll. We're on the play. We've got a really good hand. We've got Removal Spell. We've got Tarmogoyf. We got 3/4 of Delirium. So any Hand Disruption, Street Wraith, anything like that, they kill our Tarmogoyf. Traverses online. Playing Fetch Land. Pass. I'll stress this so many times. There's no reason to crack this bauble on my turn right here. If I see something that I want, then I have to make the decision to fetch and shock on my opponent's turn if I want to hold up Unholy Heat. And there's no telling if that's going to be live or relevant or what. If I see something that I do want, I can't cast it on my opponent's turn. There's nothing I can draw on their turn that's better than Unholy Heat. Like Lightning Bolt would be the same. It's not better than Unholy Heat though on turn 1. So leaving the fetch or leaving the bauble uncracked means I can go to their turn, find out more information about what I'm looking for. Because like at the moment, I don't even know what I'm looking for off the bauble. So Mountain, Float of Red, I'm assuming like Dragon's Road Chandler or Ragavan, and they suspend Rift Bolt. I believe only one deck in Modern suspends Rift Bolts, and that would be Burn. So immediately rewarded for not like bobbling on my turn and fetching and shocking on theirs. The other thing about not cracking bauble on your turn, you open yourself up to hand disruption on their turn. So if my opponent's got an Inquisition, I just drew another card and made that Inquisition better when I could have protected that card with not cracking my bauble right away. Alright, so Burn, Tarmogoyf is like best threat against Burn because it gets out of the range of Burn spells very quickly. It's sizable, decent clock. I've got the basic forest in this list, so that's why I get Blood Crypt right there. If I didn't have the basic forest, I would have gotten Stomping Ground and then just gotten a basic swamp off one of my fetches. But either way, here's a Tarmogoyf. So my opponent not having a 1-mana play, a 1-mana creature, means I'm assuming that they've got an Eidolon. Eidolon is very good at growing Tarmogoyf. So at the moment, opponents got Rift Bolt. They can aim at my Tarmogoyf. Goyf grows to a 3/4, survives the Rift Bolt. Then they can point another burn spell. Like if they've got Land Searing Blaze, that would be pretty unfortunate. It would put creature in my yard. So now that if I Unholy Heat something, Traverse is live. So them killing the Tarmogoyf wouldn't be the end of the world. Instead, they like just fire off burn spells like nobody's business. And I say, well, dang, this is horrendous. This is the hand you don't want to see against burn. When they're just like, here's spells. And then I draw a Shadow, and that whole line of thinking goes out the window. Because now I can play out a Shadow. They've got 3 cards in hand, the Rift Bolt coming off suspend. So I know they've got 3 damage. If they've got 3 bolts, I'm dead. Nothing I can do about that. But if they have anything else, or like multiple 2-mana spells, I might have a chance. Obviously don't crack the fetch because I want my opponent to point Rift Bolt at my Shadow. But they do not. So here I've got to make decisions. I can't present lethal without Fetch Shock or Cycle Street Wraith. And I've got to decide if I'm going to go for it. This Unholy Heat here is to grow the Tarmogoyf. Because there's no instant in the yard yet. So I can grow the Tarmogoyf, turn on Delirium. I can traverse for a Street Wraith, which means I'm only dead to Double Bolt or Boros Charm. And I'm presenting lethal. I think I end up just getting like double bolted here, so I don't even get to traverse. But the play was to go to exactly 4 life. So like I said, I'm presenting lethal. I'm not dead to like Searing Blaze. I can play out my fetch so that I don't have, like if they've got Lightning Helix or something, I might want to fetch Shock after that to present lethal again. But if I go to 4, I'm only dead to, like I said, Boros Charm, Double Bolt. Just so it happens that they had the Double Bolt. But that's why there's a game 2 and 3. So, sideboarding against Burn. I think a common misconception I hear about this matchup is like Street Wraiths and Thought Seizes automatically come out. And I don't think that's the case. Street Wraith, yes. I will board out all my Street Wraiths pretty much every single time, assuming I've got stuff to board in. Thought Seizes, I will often keep like 2 or 3 in for 2 reasons. One, the information is fantastic to know. Like, if my opponent's got Deflecting Palm, Path to Exile, Sanctifier on Vec, Boros Charms, whatever. I want to know about those ahead of time so I can plan out my life total a little more. The second thing is, if I Thought Seize my opponent and take a burn spell, I'm losing 2 life to prevent 3 damage. If I don't Thought Seize them, they just have 3 damage. So I'm negating a point of life loss by having Thought Seize in those opening turns. And there's oftentimes like taking an Eidolon or a Goblin Guide or Swift Spear or something where you might prevent more than 2 damage, in which case that Thought Seize is just traded up pretty heavily. So things I'm bringing in are like some number of Terminates, the Liliana for sure, and I've started bringing in the Turoks against Burn more because there's more often that they're going to have like Path to Exile, Prismatic Ending, Lightning Helix, some of those things, and Turok getting to dodge a lot of that removal. means you can often just like come down on turn 2 and start putting some sort of pressure on. That's like the name of the game with Shadow for the most part, is you need to have pressure. If you're just playing draw go, you're not going to be winning a lot of games of Magic with it. So obviously we're on the play going into game 2. See a hand of Terminate, Shadow, Liliana. I like this hand a lot, mainly because I've got a 2-mana play on my turn for their 1-mana play. It's trading down, I know, but since I'm on the play, it's mitigated. And then I've got Liliana to come down, which can like neg and deal with a Sanctifier. If they don't have a creature, I can just start ticking it up and getting burn spells out of hand. And then with Liliana pressuring their hand, they're more incentivized to throw burn spells at my face, which makes Death Shadow a lot better. So overall, it's a 4-land hand, but it's a very synergistic 4-land hand. And I think for me, that's a positive. So Goblin Guide, I'm gonna fetch before the Goblin Guide trigger resolves, because I want to get a tapped shock land, and if the Goblin Guide trigger either A, draws me into that shock land I want to get, it can be awkward, or B, sees something that I want to keep on top, then I have to consider not fetching, and that throws off my next 2 turns. I don't have Basic Mountain in this list, so I can't like see something I want on top and then fetch with fetch up a Basic Mountain to terminate with this swamp. So see Unholy Heat, which is really, really good, because now I get to like I could play like I did play the Terminate. I could play the Bloodstained Mire and fetch up a like Overgrown Tomb for the swamp on turn 3. Double Threat's a little bit rough. So here I decide to be, pretty sure I decided to be mana efficient and just terminate. Yeah. So if I find like another 1-mana spell off the top, which the Goblin Guide drew me the Bloodstained Mire, but if I find another 1-mana spell off the top, then I could hold up the Unholy Heats, or like Shadow plus Unholy Heat plus something else. Here decided that getting down double Shadow is my best choice of action. Like my opponent game 1 was throwing all their burn spells at me, so I'm kind of hoping they'll do the same thing. Even if they throw spells at the Shadow, I do get to untap and like Lily away the Swift Spear, so it's not the end of the world. Lava Spike at me is like best thing imaginable. Like, great, you just made Shadow better. And there is a decision to make here. My opponent's got 3 cards in hand, and I'm dead to 3 burn spells. So I thought for a second, like, alright, I could down tick Lily, play out a fetch, but I'm not presenting lethal. So is that the best play, or is it to get a card out of hand, chip in with a Shadow, and try to present lethal next turn? I'm also thinking about deflecting Palm a little bit, because like burn players have an obsession with deflecting Palm. So tick up, and they discard Lightning Bolt, which makes me like 100% sure that they've got deflecting Palm. Because, like, that's your best burn spell in the deck. Why are you discarding that unless you have, like, Boros Charm deflecting Palm or something like that? So, they do, in fact, Boros Charm me, sack the Sunbaked Canyon. So now I'm thinking, like, what's the play? Why are you fetching and shocking on your turn? Sanctifier. Alright, so now I've got an opponent that is tapped out with a Sanctifier. Between Peatland and the fetch land, I have the ability to do 4 damage to myself. So I know that I can get these shadows up to 12 12s. All I got to do is dodge gut shot. So instead, we're just gonna like start sacking things and swing at them. So yeah, that was game 2. So we get the trophy game. It always seems to come down to like match 5, game 3 against Burn on the draw. So this hand is okay. Tarmogoyf, like I keep saying, is like best threat in the matchup. So being able to play down a Goyf on turn 2 is nice. I've got a Bobble Scry that I can use. And with a hand like this, I'm a little more likely to go like Bobble myself. If it's a removal spell, Shock in Blood Crypt. If it's not, just play out the Bloodstained Mire. I end up shipping that one mainly because I'm really bad about this like clicking before I get to the decision point. I ship because I've got no hand disruption, no removal. Grist is a little awkward, and I'm just not like pressuring my opponent on any particular aspect. Like I'm giving them time to set up if they want it. This hand, I've got Shadow, I've got Battle Rage, I've got Bobble to draw more or draw another card. Turok's here. I have no 1 mana disruption, but I've got the Shadow Battle Rage, which is like the big thing in the matchup. Opponent keeps 7 and doesn't play a 1-drop, so immediately I feel quite a bit better about my decision. Like, if they untap and play a Sanctifier here, then my entire goal is just, like, find mana to play Liliana. In this case, if they don't play Sanctifier, then my entire plan is, like, just find lands. It's like, I just need to get to 2 Liliana mana so that I can play that out and like start working on the hand. So this is like the positive for Thoughtseize. I get to see my opponent's hand and say, okay, well, I'm not dead to burn spells in the near future. I can just take like the Boros Charm, and this Thoughtseize just saved me 2 life. Now I know their hand as well, so let's pop that back out. Bolt, Skewer. So, best case scenario here would be my opponent going like burn spell or bolt, you skewer you. But instead, they top deck Sanctifier on Beck, and that's much worse for me. And I do not draw the land, so I just decide like I'm playing out this EE on 2. The hope again is that they just like throw spells at my face, or if I find the 3rd land and I can play like EE plus Shadow, crack EE plus Shadow. Do find the 3rd land and I can get the basic forest off of it. If that had been like a Bloodstained Mire, then I probably would have ended up just having to pass and get like a tapped Overgrown Tomb. But this does lead to another fun decision point. So I've got the Lily. I know my opponent's got 3 burn spells in hand and an unknown. I kind of tank for a while and try to figure out like should I sack the Sanctifier, or should I start ticking up and trying to force the action on my opponent to get rid of these burn spells? And ultimately I decide to tick up and start forcing burn spells out of hand. I'm like, I'll get rid of like the Terminate. It's not doing anything for me. If I play Shadow next turn, I can't Terminate anyway. And they ditch the Skewer, which is obviously really nice because now that's 3 points less burn in hand. Then they triple bolt me. So now my life is like in peril for any one burn spell. Thankfully, they don't have a Sunbake Canyon. But I'm like, I've got 2 draw steps to dodge a burn spell. They attack and don't burn me. So I'm like, alright, there's a chance here. Let's tick up Lily again. The reason for this second tick up was exactly a card like that. If they had the burn spell, they would have killed me. So I know they don't have a burn spell. So the next options are things like Deflecting Palm, Path to Exile, Prismatic Ending, any of those kind of cards, because they also kill me. Because they get my shadow out and buy my opponent like 5 more turns to do whatever they want to do. So tick up the Lily first. Now I've got free reign to play out the shadow, holding up EE or holding up Bolt. And all I've got to do here is fade, burn spell, lightning bolt, prismatic ending, whatever. I can sack the EE to deal with the Sanctifier on Vec, but any of those other things will kill me. Tap red, play Goblin Guide. Awesome. Game over. Now I've got like removal spell on the Goblin Guide, untap Battle Rage, like sack with the Liliana. Opponent playing to their out of like me not having a Battle Rage, but I get to just like deal with the Sanctifier, block the Goblin Guide. Turok on top's dead. Battle Rage Shadow. And voila. So that's pretty much the wrap up. Like, all you gotta do is have your opponents not know how Death Shadow math works, and you too can get some trophies. But realistically, the deck is a lot of putting yourself in a position to win. Let your opponent make mistakes. People always talk about like Death Shadow being a difficult deck to pilot. It's also a difficult deck to play against. There's a lot of life total decisions that aren't very intuitive. So until you start like navigating those a lot, it can be rough. But hopefully this just gives everybody an idea of like, this is what the deck is looking like in current modern, which is the big thing here. Like, I wanted to show what the deck looks like against the Burns, against the Murktides, things like that, so that if you decide to play the deck, like maybe some of these lines of play will give you a little help when you're navigating those matchups. So until the next video, hope everybody has an awesome day wherever you're at in the world, and I'll catch you next time.